artistic talent at all?
Absolutely none. None.
Tell you what, if I can get you to pick up your palettes, we have a palette prepared for each of them.
That's this part, Reach.
And just sort of put your thumb right through the hole there.
Favorite art instructor, Bob Ross.
Say out loud, your work will never hang in a museum.
No.
Bob!
Well, maybe it will, but probably not to so small an extent.
Because why, Bob? What's the deal here? What are you telling us?
Well, I'm trying to teach people a form of art that anybody can do. This is art for anyone who's ever wanted to put a dream on canvas. It's not traditional art, it's not fine art, and I don't try to tell anybody it is.
Hello friends, I am so happy you pressed or stumbled on this video today. My name is Alexandre Aimé, but everybody calls me Aimé. And I'm here in my studio for my third episode of Paint and Chat, where we go into great length and detail of the life of an artist to hopefully learn from their mistakes and inspire us in our own creative journey. This video is dedicated to my participants who I love and I can't wait to see real soon. Today I have a special video for you, my lovelies. Today we're going to be exploring the life of the most iconic white fro I know, and I'm sure needs no real introduction. The one, the only, Bob Ross. But as I know, most of my students school me on Bob Ross facts all the time, so we're going to make this one a little interesting. Instead of just talking about his life and paint his face, which I'll still do, I'm going to number every fact below on the screen so you can let me know which fact you did not know. And let me know in the comment section below. Before we start, make sure you like and subscribe if you want more of my face, and let's prep our canvas. So today for my reference picture for Bob Ross, I will be using this lovely image of him, which they use on most of his branding, so please don't sue me. I'm going to be inspired by this image. It'll be my source image, but as you can tell from behind me, my style is more abstract, so I will keep it faithful to my style at the end of the day, and I'm thinking of maybe we'll add some glitter, but who knows? Stay tuned. We'll find out. Now that I'm ready to go, I'm going to start sketching my drawing, and we match. What a coincidence. It's not a coincidence. This is my Bob Ross shirt. So sit back, relax, grab a canvas or a snack, and we will be right back with the amazing life of the soft-spoken teacher everyone loves to fall asleep to.
Subtle color.
A little bit of color.
And there's no ammonia or peroxide. It even conditions your hair.
All right, now we're going to use a fan brush here, and I want you to take some hunter green, and we're going to put a happy little bush right down over here in the corner there. And that'll just be our little secret.
The man we know today as Bob Ross was born Robert Norman Ross on October 29th, 1942. 2 for 1, making him a Scorpio, which is kind of a theme at the studio. Say hi, Cole.
Hi.
He's a Scorpio. You'll meet him next video. He is best known as the host of the mega popular TV show, The Joy of Painting, an instructional TV program that aired from 1983 to 1994 on PBS. His parents were named Ollie and Jack Ross. Ollie, his mother, was born Ollie Dorothy Cordell on January 5th, 1920, and unfortunately she passed away on February 15th, 1991, at the age of 71. His mother was a waitress and his father was a carpenter. Robert, aka Bob, was born in Daytona Beach on a cool autumn day. The family would end up moving to Orlando, Florida, where he would spend the majority of his childhood. His mother and father would end up separating when he was really young. His mother would end up remarrying briefly and having her son, his brother, named Jim. But 20 years later, his parents would end up getting back together. How cute. Kind of sucks for Jim, but it's really cool for Bob. He was very close to his parents and his little brother. The perfect middle-class working family, full of love and nurture. Unfortunately, though, his childhood wasn't the easiest due to their economic status. And the divorce between his parents really did affect him subconsciously. His mom would end up fostering his love for nature from a young age, encouraging her young boys to play outside and ask questions. Bob called his animal friends critters. Peapod was his critter squirrel that lived with him for 2 years until he was ready to be released and fully ready to survive on his own. This happened during his days on Joy of Living, and Peapod was often seen hanging out in his pocket, something he had been doing since childhood with his little friends. His mom is partially to blame for this, as she would always encourage him when he would bring home a sick, orphaned, abandoned, or bruised animal to foster, always allowing him to do so without question. He once nursed an epileptic squirrel that would end up living in the family's empty jacuzzi for some time.
I think when I was a kid, I must have had every kind of pet imaginable. I lived in Florida, so I had access to a lot of creatures, but I had a pet snake. Man, he got out of the cage and was lost in the house for a long time. My mother got up and went to the bathroom one night, and he was in there and scared her.
I would have been in so much trouble. Rumor is he kept an injured alligator in the bathtub as a kid, which isn't super far-fetched as he did live in Florida. He would drop out of school in 9th grade. School was never for him. Funny, as he would technically become a modern-day icon of a virtual teacher. Bob preferred helping his dad in the workshop than being in class. This was somewhat normal in those days, especially for boys. After he dropped out of freshman year, he became his father's assistant for the carpentry business. Growing up relatively poor, this was just in the best interest for everyone. He would end up hurting himself one day while helping his father, which would lead to him missing a piece of his index finger. He somewhat hid it with different camera angles on his TV show, but when you see close-up of him holding his palette, you can see the little piece missing. Also, how does he never get paint on him? That's a serious question I have. Every video I've seen, there's never a spot of paint, and he's holding this big palette. Can't relate. Not quite a bonus fun fact because I don't believe it's true, and just judging on the name, it has to be a rumor. And he was such an amazing dad, so I can't see it being true if he knew anyways. Well, sit down for this one. There's a rumor that Bob Ross had a kid out of wedlock in 1961, who apparently, that's why I don't think this is true because it's just too good, apparently her name was Bobby. Alright, so I am done my rough draft sketch and I am going to begin painting. So stick around after this commercial break and we will start painting Bob Ross's face.
We were all at Sweet Apple Acres, and I ended up turning the trees into the most... Oh, who am I kidding?
Beautiful. I love painting trees. What do you like to paint, Riley? Aside from your own name.
Maybe today we'd make a scene that's very happy, beautiful little scene with a lot of color in it. Very easy that you can do. There we go. Okay, let's just put a happy little mountain, something about like that. And let's paint several little happy trees and push. Look at there. There. MTV, the land of happy little trees.
Welcome back. Today, I'll be using a variety of different acrylic paints. Unfortunately, I do not work with oil paints right now at this stage in my career, mostly just because I have pets and I'm really messy, so I prefer acrylic paint. So today, we will be using a bunch of different types. So this is kind of an example to show that you don't need to necessarily paint with the same brand, which is awesome, but sometimes you can mix it up. So we're going to be using this one that's like the typical, like, I'm pretty sure my grandmother gave me this one, the acrylique paint for crafters from Color Factory. So we're doing a cotton candy color. Oh, I forgot to tell you. Rewind. Today I will be painting the face of Bob Ross pink. Why, you ask? Well, one, it doesn't matter. I choose what I want to paint. And second, for me, colors represent different emotions and different chakras and things like that. So for me, I really, Bob Ross used his charm and he was very nice. And so I want to kind of be inspired by the root chakra, but also the crown. So anyways, you don't need to worry about it. Just know that his face is going to be pink / a bit of red. The second brand that I have is Amsterdam, which is an awesome heavy body paint, which I'm going to use. Where's the color name? Okay, I have no idea what color it is, but it's pink. So we're using this Amsterdam pink, this Amsterdam purple. And then we are going to also use some Saks True Heavy Flow Heavy Body Acrylic, which anyone that knows me knows this is my go-to paint. In red, big bottle, but we're only going to use a little bit. And then we're going to use a tiny bit of white too with Start Academic Acrylic, which is in the titanium white. Same thing. The biggest containers are going to be the ones we're going to use bulky stuff. These will be my supplies today, and I'll be using a variety of different brushes. Without an education and tired of working for his dad, / he was probably also seeking a new adventure. I'm using the wrong size. He enlisted in the United States Air Force at just 18 years old in 1961. He would wound up being an Air Force Master Sergeant. How do you say that, Cole?
Master Sergeant?
An Air Force?
He was a Master Sergeant.
Okay, he was a Master Sergeant. Perfect. So he drove planes. No, I don't think he flew either. Anyways, that's not a real fact. That was just something. Serving 20 years. Stationed first in Florida, then Washington, he was eventually transferred to an air base in Alaska. During his service, Bob took his first painting lesson at a USO club in Anchorage. To make a bit of money on the side, Bob actually took a job as a bartender, which will come in play later, while he was working at the military base in Alaska. He eventually had enough of military life and ended up retiring in 1981.
I spent half my life in the military, and I used to come home, take off my little soldier hat, put on my painter's hat.
You're back! Thank you so much. That makes me so happy that you're still here. And since you're still here, make sure to like and subscribe down below. It would mean so much to me. A heart of gold, and a showman for as long as anyone can remember. He had a total of 3 wives in his short lifetime. Vivian, aka Vicky, from 1965 to 1977, that ended in divorce. Jane, from 1977 to 1992, until her death, unfortunately. And his third, Linda, in 1995. Need some brushes. Bob had a son named Steve with his first wife, Vicky. Steve was born on August 1st, 1965, just a couple of months after his parents got married. Steve would end up following in his father's footsteps. Well, kind of. We'll discuss it more in detail later. Pre-COVID, he was still teaching art classes in both Colorado and Tennessee. He was super close to his dad and a quiet boy and shy about his dad's fame, and resents the Kowalskis till this day. There's a super good documentary from his perspective on Netflix I highly suggest you watch. I'll leave the trailer link in the description below. Bob, from Steve's perspective, was thrilled to be stationed in Alaska while in the military, as he loved nature. And his pops was definitely a hair guy. When getting his hair permed, he would call it getting his springs tightened. Bob Ross, just like most of us, was a night owl. When married to Vicky, she stated he would stay up all night to paint, regardless of what time he worked the next morning. Vicky and Bob ended up in divorce, and she has stated it was due to Bob cheating. There's no proof of this, but who knows? They were also pretty young when they got married. That was pretty fast, but maybe that's just me. Steve was only a kid when this happened and living in Washington. Bob was then stationed in Alaska, where he moved with Steve and where he met his second wife, Jane. And luckily, Steve approved. It's during this time as a bartender, he discovered Bill Alexander and started painting Alaska landscapes on gold pans to sell to tourists. These are some of the only legal Bob Ross art pieces you can buy outside of what's been auctioned through Bob Ross Inc. and PBS. Going back to his second wife, he met Jane not long after the divorce. She was a secretary at the Alaska base, and they wed within the same year of his divorce to Vicky. It worked out perfectly with Jane, as she would watch Steve while Bob was starting his painting career. When he retired from the Air Force and returned home to Florida, Bob attended various art schools and painting classes. Bob thrived in his early painting classes and loved the attention. His greatest inspiration was Bill Alexander, a painter who hosted an educational painting program from 1972 to 1982 on PBS called The Magic of Painting, where he showed how to perfect the wet-on-wet painting technique.
Old painting method called alla prima, which means direct painting or all at once.
But what is alla prima? Wet-on-wet or direct painting, you might be asking. Well, the wet-on-wet technique involves applying oil paint on top of still wet oil paint, rather than waiting between layers for the paint to dry. You could also use gesso as kind of the layer that you would put first, and it would work really well. This allowed the composition to be completed quickly, which made the technique perfect for the half-hour television program structure. Throughout art history from the 16th century until today, artists such as Diego Velázquez, as well as Impressionist painter Claude Monet and Vincent van Gogh, realist painter John Singer Sargent, in different ways employed the alla prima or wet-on-wet technique. Bob discovered this series while he was working as the bartender. Remember? While in Alaska painting those gold pans, and became a huge fan. It would end up taking Bob a full year before being able to find Bill Alexander. And when he did find him, they hit it off. Bob would even start working for him as a traveling art instructor for his company. He would also end up studying under Alexander, who would go on to become his mentor. Oil paintings can take days, months, years to complete. But the wet-on-wet technique with gesso as a base made it possible to be completed in no time. Bob Ross would go on to dedicate the first episode of The Joy of Painting to Alexander. Bill Alexander would go on to give Bob Ross his stamp of approval. In the early 80s, as he himself was preparing to retire, he personally asked Ross to take over his teaching classes.
I hand over that almighty brush to our mighty man, Bob.
Bonus fun fact! Bob Ross was clearly inspired by his days living in Alaska, and he could paint his landscapes in less than 26 minutes. Bob Ross agreed to take over for Bill Alexander and set to tour the country. He ended up traveling in his own motorhome to teach the people of America the wet-on-wet technique. These classes were offered in shopping malls and art stores across the country. Yet he only had small groups of students. He told his wife that he would try this life for 1 year, and if it didn't work out, he would come right back home. And it's reported he was never home during that full year. Lucky for him, though, he would end up meeting the student that would change his life within his 1 year time frame. It's during this time on this road trip that he would adopt his infamous afro. And the reasoning behind it was instead of paying for haircuts, it would be much cheaper to get a perm. He said he hated the hairstyle. Everyone knows this. This is not a secret. But understood business. And his face and hair became beyond recognizable and literally his trademark and brand. So he toughed it up and he kept it. He would meet a student that would change the course of his life forever. While working and teaching classes, Mrs. Annette KOWALSKI, loving his positivity, and saw through the hair and potential he had. After the retreat, she became Ross's manager, which led him to book his iconic Joy of Painting.
Hi, I'm Bob Ross, and for the next 13 weeks, I'll be your host as we experience the joy of painting.
Bonus fun fact. Bob Ross smoked cigarettes. He had a heart attack in the mid-80s, and he had a feeling that he would die young. Painting update. Woo. I have slowly started building layers to form Mr. Ross's face. I am using the colors I mentioned earlier, and I'm just really trying to take my time and really concentrate on every brush stroke and just kind of trust myself that I know what I'm doing, because I feel like I don't. And that's normal as an artist. I think we self-doubt ourselves a lot. But you just gotta keep going and push through it. So while I have an existential crisis, stay tuned and I will be right back after this commercial break.
Hello, I'm Bob Ross, and I'd like to welcome you. First of all, let me take just a moment to thank you for allowing me back into your homes. If this is your first time with us, let me extend a personal invitation for you to drag out your oil paints and paint along with us each week. Let's go over to the canvas here and let's get started. I believe, every day's a good day when you paint. I believe, it will bring a lot of good thoughts to your heart. I believe, every day's a good day when you paint. I believe, it will bring a lot of good thoughts to your heart. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. Start out by believing here. You can almost paint with anything. All you have to do is practice. There are no limits here. Start out by believing here. This is your world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas. Believe that you can do it. Because you can do it. Give it a little touch. Give it a little push. Make love to the canvas. Give it a little touch. Give it a little push. Caress it. Very gently. Grab it. Lift it. Fluff it. You can go on and on and on. Back and forth. Layer after layer after layer. Let's build a happy little cloud. Let's build some happy little trees. There are no limits here. Start out by believing here. This is your world. You're the creator.
Woo! Welcome back. So Bob Ross is a very fast painter. If you've never seen it in action for yourself, here's a mini clip.
Evergreen tree. He lives right there. Start with just touching the canvas. Use just the corner of the brush. Just the corner. And begin pushing, making the bristles bend slightly downward. See there? Look at that. Isn't that a nice little tree? And he lives right here in this brush.
He was so fast, making them able to film 3 shows in one day. Nothing was truly ad-libbed. He knew exactly what he was going to say when planning his paintings. The voice he put on was a bit fake. He didn't actually talk like that, but there's a very smart reason why. My man Bob, he was smart, and he knew that women were his main demographic. So he took the opposite approach of Bill Alexander, his mentor, who was known to be very direct and rough in his teaching methods. And Bob, well, he would take a completely different route. He would be sweet and nice, almost like talking in a whisper, which drove the ladies crazy. Oh, he was definitely a ladies' man. So basically, Bob was trying to sound sexy, giving the vibe that he was talking to your soul. And once you know this, it can't escape your brain. I'll prove it to you right now.
All right, let's have some fun. Time to get crazy. Let's mix up some Prussian blue, some black.
What a stud. Plus, can we point out, it said that the reason why he dressed the way he did was to be like, what's the word called? Like timeless? Yeah, timeless. But what's with the open shirt? I don't get it. It has to be an 80s thing. Even Steve had the full open shirt. He used his sex appeal to his advantage, that's for sure. And it worked. If you're young, this might be harder to grasp, but it's true. Bob Ross is a certified fop. For every episode, 3 paintings were created. The first was his reference image that he would create and would be off screen. He would refer to that one while the camera was rolling. Nothing was spontaneous, contrary to popular belief. Then there was the one that he was painting while the episode was playing live, and the third would be completed when he was finished filming. Would be for after he was done painting for his book, which was a how-to book, and Annette was the one that would take each picture of each brush stroke to show the people who would buy the book how to complete his painting. If needed, he could film the entire season of of painting in only 2 days. That's crazy! Only 2 days! That's 39 paintings in the span of 48 hours. Which explains how he had the time to do everything he did in those days. One season of The Joy of Painting was 13 episodes and was a worldwide hit. The show was broadcast in 95% of America's public service station channels, thingies, whatever you call them, the PBSs of everywhere, which led his show to reach over 93.5 million homes. His show is also broadcasted in dozens of different countries. Bob Ross was a megastar in Japan, and he even got mauled when he visited by a ton of his fans. It's said that in Japan, they would air The Joy of Painting twice a day. He was a celebrity guest at the Grand Ole Opry in 1987, where Frank Snow brought him up on stage, and Bob would have all these country stars coming to him, almost like little fangirls, asking him questions and asking if they could book private art classes. What a cute moment that must have been backstage. Bonus fun fact, his favorite brush was the 2-inch brush, something he technically invented, or anyways, he popularized. Speaking of 2 inches, you can see over 400 of his paintings all in a database brought to you by 2inchbrush.com. Not sponsored. Stolen reference paintings from season 2 got taken from the back of a van. So he would end up winging that season, which was the only season that was that improvised. But Bob made it work. He, thanks to Annette and the Bob Ross Inc., would release his first book in 1989 called The Best of The Joy of Painting. Televised art programs in the 1980s were super big. Like, there were a ton. It wasn't just Bob Ross doing it. But Bob Ross, being the amazing guy he is, he actually ended up shouting out a bunch of his fellow peers and other artists doing their own thing, especially when it came to techniques or styles that he not necessarily was comfortable doing, which is super awesome. Annette and Walter Kowalski first met Ross after the death of their son, who died in a car crash in 1982 at just 25 years old. Also, before I get any further in this video, the Kowalskis have a huge reputation for suing people. So everything I say about them is alleged for entertainment purposes, and also everything that I'm saying is you can find it all on the internet. It's super accessible. So I'm just kind of gathering the information I found. So they're still alive, so please don't sue me. Thank you. Let's discuss a bit more in detail how exactly she met Bob Ross. Annette, also loving Bill Alexander, who greatly helped her to deal with the death of her son, as when she was in a depression after his death, she would follow along his paintings, and she was finally ready to attend a class in person. She wanted to book a retreat with Alexander, but only Bob was available. Remember, this was in the time that Bill Alexander had literally passed on his brush to Bob Ross. This turned out well, as both of their lives would change after this. She was inspired and renewed after her time with Bob. They would end up taking William Alexander's business model and replicating it, but with Bob. And the three, so Walt, Annette, and Bob, and technically Jane too, his second wife, would all enter business together officially in 1985, which is the same year that the show started, so that makes sense. They are now retired, and their daughter Joan runs the company. The Bob Ross Inc. headquarters are in Sterling, Virginia, near the Kowalski's family home. Did I say that right? Kowalski's? Kowalski's? The Kowalski's home. Both Walt and Annette are still alive according to the internet as I'm filming this. Annette was born Annette Eva Hall on January 26, 1936 in Arlington, Virginia. They had a total of 5 children and had been married for over 60 years. You know what? You can say or think what you want about them, but that's pretty cool and pretty inspirational. And from my research, they have been through a lot together. Now, back to Bob. Bob, he wasn't into it for the money. But Walt, Annette's husband, he sure was. The Kowalskis encouraged him to branch off from Bill Alexander, franchise, and to do his own thing. His first solo class was a failure. No one showed up, but they didn't stop pushing their vision. Bob, Jane, and Steve would end up moving with the Kowalskis for about a year and a half in this time. Walt was a recently retired CIA member and used his government contacts to push Bob Ross's career. It's also said he recorded every phone call. I guess you can take the spy out of the government, but not the government out of the spy. I have no idea if that's a thing, but it should be. Bill quite literally passed his brush to Ross, and they would market Bob as the new Alexander, but with a gentle flair. Bob was a flirt and a charmer, especially with Annette. It's even reported she would get jealous of other students he would bond with. Honestly, the more research I do, the more sugar mama vibes I get. Plus, there's a rumor they took their relationship to inappropriate levels or lengths. You get what I'm saying. In the 1980s. But it was the 80s, and that type of thing was sort of normalized, depending on your circle. Also, let's not forget, Bob Ross did grow up in the 60s, and it was a swinging time. But this affair did put a rift in Bob's marriage and created great tension between him and Jane. They did end up working it out, but it definitely caused a strain in the relationship. Honestly, I don't think Annette was the only one. Bob was on the road a lot, so you can use your imagination. Annette, on the other hand, I think she really fell for Ross and became very invested in him. That must have been awkward for Walt, no? Like, what about Walt and all this? Annette's husband. He's just doing his CIA stuff. I'm pretty sure he knew about it. He used to work for the CIA. He knew what was going on. Annette did end up distancing herself when things got real weird between her and Jane. So Annette would end up distancing herself from the show, but not the business. Jane, Bob's second wife, helped with the administrative side of the business. So they're all one big happy family living together and working together. That must have not been awkward at all. I'm joking. It must have definitely been awkward. In 1992, Jane was diagnosed with cancer and lost her life, unfortunately. That same year, Bob was also diagnosed with cancer. Technically his second diagnosis in his lifetime. Just weeks after his wife's death, Bob would end up having a heart attack and was bedridden. He was so worried about the fish he fed daily at home that he asked Annette if she could go feed them while he was at the hospital. So the fish, it wasn't just like fish in an aquarium. It's like he would take out his canoe and go to a pond and feed the fish. His last wife, Linda, his third wife, was a nurse he had known while spending time at the hospital. They were married 2 months before Bob Ross passed away in 1995. His brand, Bob Ross, was so much more than just his television series. It was supplies and an industry still thriving today. In 1987, he trained and sent out his first team of Bob Ross certified paint instructors to teach around the world in his place the wet-on-wet technique. He technically worked for free. He did not get paid for his time doing the Joy of Living show, but rather from the Bob Ross Corporation. Bob Ross Inc. is a company that still exists and thrives today. His mega successful series ended up wrapping up in his 31st season. That's a lot. When Bob returned to Florida when he got sick, they, due to this, started showing reruns on PBS. His friends have openly expressed their concern with his use of paint thinner. Not saying it was the cause of his death, but it could definitely lead to the progression of his cancer. So maybe he could have lived longer had it not been for being exposed to so much paint thinner. But on that subject, I think it's super important that we take a moment and talk about art safety. Just because it's odorless, it means nothing. You have to remember, when we're painting and working with supplies, we're working with chemicals. We're working with toxic products. Sometimes they're not toxic, don't get me wrong, but often they are. So it's super, super important that we take the proper steps, like wear a mask when you work with paint thinner or spray paints. Don't eat acrylic paint, things like that. So it's super important when we're working with products to know your product and to know what's in them and to know how to properly protect yourself, because you are your most important canvas. Now, back to Bob Ross. In 1994, knowing that Bob didn't have much time, Annette tried her hand at teaching, but this would be very scandalous. She instructed how to paint flowers using a wet-on-wet technique that was not her own, stealing other people's instructions under the Bob Ross name. It did not work out well, but there is also a book that she released about how to paint these flowers. She was basically gentrifying the art market of the time and taking full credit under the Bob Ross Inc. Corporation. They also introduced Steve as an instructor, but it wasn't for him. He didn't want to be his dad. Like most kids, he wanted to rebel. His dad wanted him to take over, but that just wasn't in his cards, even leading them to not talk for several years. That is, until Bob got sick. They bonded then and became even closer around the time of Jane's death. Bob Ross ended up doing chemo treatment, which, if you can believe it or not, he ended up losing his hair and would wear a wig at the end of his life. This was very hard for the prideful, humble man. Ross made a kids' TV show in the last year of his life called The Adventures of Elmer and Friends, where he would share his love for animals. His health was declining tremendously before the pilot was made, but he was able to be part of it, filming his parts from his home, very reminiscent of how the world works nowadays. Due to his health, he was only able to make an appearance on the pilot episode. Bob Ross in his life would end up doing a giant meet and greet at Central Park where he met a bunch of fans, signed their paintings, and did a live performance of one of his paintings. just like his show, but in person. A little painting update. So I'm still working on his face, and I'm just putting a bit more details. Usually I try to cover more surface by this point, but this time I'm trying really hard to concentrate on my tiny brush strokes. Bob Ross knew nothing about the business side of Bob Ross Inc., but it did very well. Think about it. For every painting, you needed supplies. But it was all Walt and Annette. He was just the face. A beautiful face. Bob Ross Inc. has supply stores across America. His line of Bob Ross products were showcased on QVC. After he would be showcased on air talking about his products, Marlon Brando called the production office to talk to Bob Ross. He was speechless. Bob Ross Inc. sold art supplies, how-to video VHS tapes, would organize lucrative group classes and retreats, and had those traveling art instructors that roamed the world painting, kind of like how Bob Ross started with Bill Alexander. These traveling artists were also excellent salespeople, advertising the Bob Ross brand and products. Also, remember that TV culture was different back then. People with money weren't particularly glued to their screen, and they were the people that were booking these fancy retreats. Bob Ross paint is specially made for his technique and was formulated so everyone can paint like a pro. And side note, as much as Bob Ross wasn't involved in the business, he was very involved in when it came to the paint and the materials and all that jazz. So it definitely had the Bob Ross stamp of approval. He mastered the art of business, leading to many starving artists to truly resent him. And my honest opinion is, if you don't like someone, it's totally a reflection on yourself. So I kind of see it as y'all a little jealous. A lot of his art, a lot of these people that would kind of bash his art would more refer to his art as art therapy as opposed to fine art. And Bob was fine with that. He knew that. Bill Alexander, his mentor, would go on to say in his later life that Bob Ross betrayed him. Stealing his wet-on-wet technique. And, there is proof that he passed the brush, so this makes no sense. Yeah, he's a little salty, that one. It's estimated that only 10% of viewers would actually paint alongside Bob Ross while watching his show. That's nothing! Most people just watch his show to listen to him talk and watch him paint. 91% of his paintings included trees. But they were never alone. If he paints a tree, there's a 93% chance that he'll give him a friend. His son Steve would end up sometimes subbing for his dad on a few occasions, and 91% of his paintings were lakes. How did I find this information? Bob Ross shot a total of 403 episodes of The Joys of Painting. That's 3 paintings per episode, remember? Nintendo was at one point in the talks with Bob Ross Inc. to make a video game. But this might be a lie because the information was released around April 1st, so let's not count that as a fact. Bob Ross, besides the gold pans when he was in Alaska before he really started becoming an artist, did not sell his paintings. But there are 13 paintings loose and got stolen during the show's 2nd season. Remember the ones taken from his van? I can't imagine how much that must go for on the black market. Bonus fun facts. His YouTube channel is still going strong with 5.13 million subs and Bob Ross certified hosts and, of course, original throwbacks. Also, you can become a certified Bob Ross instructor through the Bob Ross website. I will leave the link in the description below. He was also on Twitch on his birthday, in 2015, for a weekend marathon. That happened on Twitch October 29th starting at noon. So when the interactive platform Twitch launched the Bob Ross channel, it was a non-stop marathon of The Joy of Painting. There were over 5.6 million unique views and thousands of requests for more when the series ended. Bob Ross passed away July 4th, 1995. He was only 52 years old when he passed away and ended up touching countless hearts in his short lifetime. He would unfortunately leave us too soon. The cause of his death was his battle with lymphoma. He brought more joy to people than most do with double the time on earth. And now that's a legacy to live up to. And his legacy does live on. During his life and career, he did not make his private life public, which made researching his video very one-sided. Can you guess which side? I'll give you a hint. Starts with a K and ends with a ski. No one knew he was sick till after his death, except for his close friends and his business partners. He made over 30,000 paintings since starting his artistic journey back in Alaska. Bob Ross is now a certified pop culture icon. Steve, his son, filed a lawsuit in 2018 against Bob Ross Inc., specifically Annette and Walter, revealing that when Bob Ross was at the end of his life, Annette did everything in her power to get Bob Ross to sign over his rights. Bob ended up changing his will months before his death to assure something would be left for his son and family. Steve lost the lawsuit and makes no profit from his father's legacy. It's said that this might be why he got married so suddenly, to have some money, as after Jane died, her share of the Bob Ross Inc. got separated, which actually ended up making Bob Ross a minority shareholder in his own company. The death of Bob was very hard on Steve. After his death in 1995, Bob Ross was introduced to European local television. The business would end up changing greatly after Bob Ross's death. It's said it became a very hostile work environment. There's a lot of drama when it comes to identifying a Bob Ross painting. Plus, the only person that actually has full power to authorize a Bob Ross painting is Annette. The merchandising we know now, like seeing his face everywhere on t-shirts, mugs, everything, really took off post-death. Bob would end up leaving everything to his brother Jim and his son Steve. But something I don't think Bob ended up knowing in his lifetime is his brother Steve would actually end up signing over his rights to WALT and Annette. Something his son Steve only found out later on in life. And that's honestly what screwed Steve over. And he was pissed, and I don't blame him. Moral of the story? Your parents aren't always nagging at you. Had he just listened to his dad, he could have been the new face of the corporation. Who knows? Steve, when his dad died, got really depressed. But with time, he was able to grab a paintbrush and started painting again. And as I said earlier, he now teaches art. Bob and Annette would use the Bob Ross name and afro to grow the business even more after his death. Their daughter, Joan Kowalski, who, before running the company, was the media director. Well, she's the person to thank for the emergence of Bob Ross on social media. So think about his YouTube channel, the Twitch, all that on social media. That's all thanks to Joan. No one truly knows how much the Kowalskis ended up making from profiting from the Bob Ross name. But I can assure you, they're rich. Bonus fun fact. Most of his paintings that he would do for a show ended up in the hands of charities and PBS. With 403 episodes, 3 paintings an episode, he ended up creating a total of 1,209 paintings for his series. You can even see his original work in Florida, at a local gallery in Florida. And I am almost done my Bob Ross painting. Here it is. And that is 107 Bob Ross facts. I want to thank you so much for being here. I'm so grateful and thank you. And if you have not already, make sure you like and subscribe. So, my thoughts pre-research. Everyone hates on him as an artist, but I think he's a marketing genius. Not much is known about him, and his joy of painting is still as popular today as it was in his prime. My thoughts post-research. Okay, Mr. Ross. He's a teacher, a hopeless romantic, and maybe an asshole depending on who you're asking. I kid, but not really. After research, wow, he is so interesting. So much more than just little trees. And his work ethic is really, really admirable. He truly believed in himself, and that's what he transmitted in his show. He wanted people to have a moment where they can believe in themselves too. And finally, our last bonus fun fact. Bob Ross was a nature lover. He had a canoe, which he would use to fish and release, and he was also known to say that he loved to hunt with a camera. He really was a nature-loving sweetheart. He made people believe in themselves, and he loved life and fast cars, even owning a Corvette. His art wasn't revolutionary, and he knew that, but rather accessible. And that's okay too. Everyone deserves to experience the joys of painting.
And that might truly be the joy of painting, is the friends that you make doing it.
And that's a wrap. I will see you next week for a brand new video.
This is your world. You're the creator. Find freedom on this canvas. Believe that you can do it, because you can do it.